We started our study of Mark's Gospel all the way back the first Sunday of January. So we've been studying Mark's Gospel for about 10 months now. And today, we finally arrive at the climax of the story, a place called Calvary. Now, you and I hear that term Calvary, and we know it well. We've heard it before, but let me remind you what that word means. Calvary is the Latin translation of the Greek word Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. So when we say we've arrived at Calvary, we mean we've arrived at the place of the skull. And what's important for us to get in our mind is this picture, that this is a place unlike any place we've been in the gospel stories so far. So the Gospels begin in Galilee, where Jesus is preaching and teaching and healing all around the Galilean lake. And when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, we know he stays on the Mount of Olives with its majestic views of the city of Jerusalem. And we've seen Jesus go into the holy city and spend time at the temple, which in that period was one of the wonders of the world. And now we're at Calvary, the place of the skull. And when you look at the pictures, you just think to yourself, which of these doesn't belong with the others? There is a striking contrast between Calvary and every other place we've been so far in the gospel. Calvary is a place of darkness and death. It is the execution chamber of Jesus' time period. For the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time at Calvary. We're going to be examining the crucifixion of Jesus. And as we do so, there's several angles or questions that are going to frame the way that we engage this moment. First, what happened at Calvary? What exactly happened on the cross? Second, why did Jesus have to die? And why did he have to die in this way? And third, what does it all mean for us and for the world around us? You know, at the center of this story stands the cross, a 9-foot stake planted in the ground with a crossbeam weighing somewhere around 100 pounds. For 2,000 years, the cross has become the predominant symbol of Christian faith. If you don't believe me, just take a look around the room. Here we are sitting in a church, and we have a cross that's hung right directly in the center. And we have a cross that we keep in our preciously limited storage space. We keep one of these on hand just for when we need it. And if you look in our stained glass windows, you'll find over here a crown of thorns and a nail, a reminder of the cross. If you look at our steeple, there's a cross on top of it. And I wore my do-tell fleece today. Look at our logo. There's a cross right in the middle of our church logo. And it's not just our church, but we have crosses everywhere. Some of you maybe hang crosses in your houses. Maybe like me, you have a decorative cross that hangs around your neck or on your earrings. Maybe you've got a tattoo with a cross on it. We love our crosses. We put them everywhere. And the cross has become such a powerful symbol of our faith that we forget just how bizarre it is to put a cross anywhere. Remember that for people living in the days of Jesus, to hang one of these around your neck would be the equivalent of like walking around with an electric chair hanging around your neck. The cross was not a symbol of hope. It was not a symbol of love. It was a torture device, a means of executing criminals. It is only in reflecting on this story that we find hope in this symbol. So for 800 years, the Romans utilized crucifixion as the primary means of capital punishment for those that they deemed to be the worst of criminals. The very word crucifixion has the same root word as the word excruciating. The purpose of crucifixion was to inflict excruciating suffering and to prolong the agony of a criminal's death. The penalty of crucifixion began with flogging. The victim was whipped, not whipped to the point of death, whipped so as to maximize the amount of pain but keep them completely conscious. And after being flogged, the victim was forced to carry their crossbeam all the way to the execution site. And those crossbeams could weigh up to 100 pounds. We know that Jesus was so weakened by the flogging that he'd received that he could not carry his crossbeam all the way. It simply became impossible for him to carry it anymore, and so they conscripted a man named Simon to carry the cross the rest of the way. And when the victims of crucifixion would arrive at the execution site, they would be stripped of all their clothes. They would be crucified naked. And they would be affixed to the cross with nails that would be driven through the wrist and through the feet. And then they would hang on that cross for hours and sometimes days, dying a slow, painful, agonizing death. And they would ultimately die of some combination of blood loss, dehydration, and asphyxiation. And to make it all worse, the entire thing happened in public. Romans crucified people as a public deterrent. It was a warning shot to anybody. You think you want to cross Roman authority, you'll end up on a cross. And so crucifixions always happened in very public places, on busy roadways. And since the cross is only 9 feet high, people passing by could look straight into the eyes of one being crucified. They could even carry on a conversation with them. That's what crucifixion looks like. It was the Roman statesman Cicero who said about crucifixion that it is the most horrendous and painful way to die. It was the historian of the Jewish people, Josephus, who called it the most miserable of deaths. And this is what happens to Jesus. In Mark 15, verse 24, we're now on Friday morning. Jesus has just endured a long night that began in the upper room, that led to his betrayal, his denial, and his condemnation. And now Mark writes these words, "And they crucified him." 4 simple words, but they tell us everything we need to know. All of the gruesome horror of Roman crucifixion was endured by Jesus Christ, the Son of God. If you watched Mel Gibson's film, The Passion, you know that it was a gruesome and bloody thing to be crucified. When I watch that film, all I see is blood. When you read the Gospels choose to spare us those details. When you read the Gospels, they don't talk about all of the gore of the moment because they don't want us to see so much blood that we lose sight of the meaning of it all. But make no doubt, it was a gruesome and horrific scene. And Jesus endured all of it. Now, when Mark tells us of the crucifixion, what he chooses to focus in on is the way in which Jesus was humiliated and mocked in the moment of his death. It all starts in the Praetorium, which was the headquarters of Pilate's military in Jerusalem. This would have been an area inside the Antonia fortress, that military fortress that was set up next to the temple. When Jesus is condemned by Pilate to die, he goes to the Praetorium. And it's there that the Roman soldiers are going to prepare him for crucifixion. And the scene is a horrific one because a cohort of Roman soldiers, that would be several hundred Roman soldiers, decide to make a mockery of Jesus. So Jesus' crime is that he is the king of the Jews. He's a rival king to Caesar. So they set up a mock coronation ceremony. They wrap Jesus in a purple robe, purple the color of royalty. And instead of placing a golden crown on his head, they place a crown of thorns on his head. And they fall before him, and in mock cries they say, "Hail, King of the Jews," which would have echoed those cries of, "Hail, Caesar." And as they're doing this, they're spitting upon Jesus as a sign of shame and as a way to demean him. And they're taking a club and they're just knocking him over the head with it time and time again. It is humiliating. It is torturous. When I think about this moment, I thought, are there any modern equivalents, anything we can think of in our world that would be like what Jesus was experiencing here? And it reminds me of what happened at Abu Ghraib, the prison in 2004, where soldiers and CIA operatives tortured and brutalized prisoners of war. And we called that then a human rights violation. And so I want you to get this image in your mind that what's happening to Jesus in the Praetorium is what you and I would call a human rights violation. Even if he was guilty of the crimes that he was accused of, it would still be inhumane to do what they're doing. Well, Jesus is led from the Praetorium to Calvary. And along the way, he carries the cross and falls, and Simon of Cyrene picks up his cross. And when they arrive at Calvary, they do something for Jesus. This is verse 23 of Mark 15. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. Now, in the pre-medical world, if you took wine and you mixed it with myrrh, that's how you get a narcotic. And so wine with myrrh would essentially be something that would get you high. And so they offered crucifixion victims wine mixed with myrrh as a gentle kind of show of mercy. You take this, you're going to get high, you'll be a little bit out of your mind, maybe it'll numb the pain for you just a little bit. And I want you to notice that Jesus refused it. And that's important for us to know, because when Jesus is on the cross, he's not high on drugs. He's not trying to numb the pain. Jesus is fully present, fully in his right mind, all the way up until his death. When Jesus chose to take on the cup of suffering, he chose to take it on all the way. He's not trying to hide or mask even an ounce of the pain. And so Jesus is there, he refuses to receive the wine, and it's at this point that the executioners strip Jesus of his clothing. Now, it was common in Roman crucifixion for criminals to be crucified completely naked, but there is some historical evidence that because of the Jewish custom that was very bashful about public nudity, that perhaps they allowed Jesus to have a loincloth to cover the essentials. But by and large, Jesus is stripped bare. And then the executioners, they cast lots to divide up his garments. And it's in this moment that Mark is intending us to hear an echo of Psalm 22, the psalm that Cheryl read for us just a little while ago, and the psalm that will soon be on the lips of Jesus as one of his prayers from the cross. Let me remind you what it says in Psalm 22, beginning at verse 17. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. So here we have this prayer that's written hundreds of years before this moment, and it expresses perfectly what Jesus is experiencing. And what we're meant to hear is this: all of this chaos that's happening to Jesus, all of this horror and gruesome violence he's receiving, all of these people staring at him and stripping him of his clothes, it's actually according to the plan. This is all according to God's plan. Now, those who are crucifying Jesus are attempting to upend God's plan. What they don't realize is unwittingly they're actually advancing the plan that God had from the beginning. And Jesus is fully aware of that. It's why he's submitting to this. He knows this is the Father's will. And so with that, Jesus is nailed to the cross, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, his hanging on the cross begins. And what Mark tells us is that as Jesus is hanging on the cross, every single individual that's there begins to mock him. The passers-by, they throw insults at him. Even the criminals who hang on the cross with Jesus are hurling insults at him. Now, Luke tells us that one of them, after a while, has a change of heart, ultimately repents of his sin, but they both start in the same place. They're even heaping insults at Jesus. And the mockery comes to a fever pitch on the lips of the chief priest and the teachers of the law, which, if you remember, are two of the groups that make up the Sanhedrin, the very leaders who got Jesus into this predicament. Listen to the words that they say. Mark 15:31. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross that we may see and believe. They say that if Jesus claims to be the Messiah, then he should save himself. Come down from the cross, then we'll believe that you're the Messiah. And their mockery drips with irony. And the irony is this: Jesus is the Messiah. And the proof of it is not that he's coming down from the cross, but that he's remaining on it. Could Jesus have rescued himself from the cross? Yes. But Jesus isn't trying to save his life. He's trying to save the world. And he knows that the way to save the world is not to avoid the cross, but to endure it. And so Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is crucified. The light of the world, sent into the world to illumine the darkened human heart, that light is extinguished by the very world he came to save. And the story is as cold and dark and painful and awful as it sounds. And yet, we call this good news. We celebrate the cross. We sang it earlier, lift high the cross. We lift high the cross. We cherish the cross. Why? Well, in one word, love. We believe that the cross is the place where God displays his love. It says it this way in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. This is love on display. That the God of the universe chose to give Jesus in an act of love to a world that had rejected him. And the way I like to think of it is this: the cross is the pulpit from which God preaches the message, this is how much I love you. And you know this in your own life, because the people you love the most are the people you're willing to die for. And Jesus says, I will die for the people I love the most. And the most amazing thing about the cross to me is that as Jesus is there enduring this inhumane, this unspeakable pain, his first prayer is not a prayer of God, relieve me from this pain. His first prayer is not a prayer that God would smite these people who have so greatly wronged him. Do you know what his first prayer is from the cross? Luke tells us. He looks out upon these people who have mocked him and spit upon him. These people have hurled insults at him and falsely accused him. And he prays, he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, do you just realize what kind of love that has to be to look into the face of the one who spits upon you and say, I love you enough to pray for your forgiveness. I love you enough to hang here and die the death that was yours. We lift high the cross not because it was easy. We lift high the cross not because it wasn't dark and shameful and horrible way to die. We lift high the cross because it is the symbol of love, of God's unending, unconditional, unchanging love for us. When you came to church today, we gave you a nail. This is not the nail that was used. The nails that would have been used to nail Jesus to the cross would have been long and very, very sharp. This is the church-friendly nail. But it is for us another symbol of our faith. And this nail represents what Jesus was willing to do because He loves you and me. And this morning, I just want to give our church a chance to cherish the old rugged cross once more. And to remember this act of Jesus, this act of love. And so, as we sing the next hymn, I'm just going to open the prayer rail. And if you feel so led and you'd like to have a moment of prayer to come to the cross and to thank Jesus for what He did for you, I invite you to come. And you know, there might be a couple of different ways that this nail could be meaningful to you. Some may find it meaningful to come and leave this nail at the altar as a symbol of surrendering to Christ at the cross. Others may find it meaningful to take it home as a daily reminder of just how much Jesus loves you. But I'll invite you now in this time to, as you feel led, to sing, to pray, to reflect, and to thank Jesus for His great love on the cross.